Please bring me back my child.
In 1998, a woman posing as a nurse entered the hospital room of Kamiyah Mobley and claimed she needed to take her newborn for an examination. Tragically, the woman was an imposter named Gloria Williams, who had recently suffered a miscarriage and kidnapped the baby. It would take nearly 20 years before Kamiyah was reunited with her daughter, who had grown into a young woman during their heartbreaking separation. The kidnapped baby, named Kamiyah Mobley, was raised as Alexis Manigault for 18 years, unaware of her true identity. When the truth of her abduction came to light, Kamiyah shocked many by advocating for leniency in Gloria Williams' sentencing. She explained that despite the circumstances, Gloria had provided her with a loving and stable upbringing. Kamiyah and her mother reportedly had a rocky relationship after being reunited, with her mother even going as far to say that she sometimes wishes her daughter had never been found. Rosalyn McGinnis spent 19 years being imprisoned and sexually abused by her stepfather, during which she gave birth to 9 of his children. McGinnis was captured at the age of 12 and taken from Oklahoma to Mexico by Henry Piet, who first impregnated her when she was just 15, forced to take on fake identities and earn money begging on the streets. McGinnis somehow managed to survive 9 births with no medical care. Despite her dire circumstances, she shielded her children from the horrific truth of her kidnapping and imprisonment, sparing them the psychological trauma of their reality. After 19 years of captivity, McGinnis made a daring escape in 2016, when she encountered an American couple at a grocery store. With their help, she successfully fled her captor, and Henry Piet was arrested the following year. At 33 years old, McGinnis returned to the United States, reuniting with her family after decades of separation. Henry Piet was later sentenced to life in prison for his heinous crimes. Jaycee Dugard was just 11 years old when she was tased on the street and shoved into the back of a car by Philip and Nancy Garrido. The twisted couple kept Jaycee prisoner in a makeshift camp in their backyard for over 18 years, where she was handcuffed, abused, and raped. During her time in captivity, Jaycee gave birth to 2 daughters who were aged 11 and 15 when they were finally rescued. Philip and Nancy believed that sexually abusing children was God's will and had been scouting out children for some time before kidnapping Jaycee. Jaycee and her 2 daughters were finally freed in 2009 after Philip took the children into a California University campus, seeking permission to hold an event relating to his disturbing theories on religion and sexual desire. After nearly 2 decades, Jaycee was barely recognizable. Philip Garrido was sentenced to life imprisonment, and his wife received 36 years. 7-year-old Steven Stayner was abducted by child molester Kenneth Parnell in Merced, California in 1972. He was taken by his abductor about 40 miles away, where he was held for 7 years. Parnell began sexually abusing Stayner 2 weeks into his imprisonment, telling him that he had been granted custody of him and that his parents no longer wanted him. Parnell also forced Stayner to help him attempt to abduct other boys several times, but Stayner deliberately sabotaged the kidnappings. After Parnell was helped by another teenage boy to kidnap 5-year-old Timmy White, Stayner escaped with him and hitchhiked to freedom. Both children were reunited with their families, but Stayner was never the same again. Shockingly, Parnell avoided charges of rape and served only 5 years in prison for the kidnappings. Stayner died in a motorcycle accident at the age of 24. Timmy White helped carry his coffin at the funeral. Riker Webb was 3 years old when he disappeared from his backyard while playing with his dog. 2 days later, he was found 2.5 miles away, alive and well, after somehow surviving alone in the Montana wilderness, the home of mountain lions, bears, and other deadly wild animals. But somehow, Riker had managed to survive. A massive search and rescue effort eventually saved Riker's life when a family discovered him taking shelter in an old log cabin. He was said to be healthy, but visibly shaken after his ordeal.
Riker, do you remember when you got lost? What did you see?
I see a house.
A house? In the woods?
Yeah. So I can live and then live there. And then I can live there.
Someone lived in the house?
Yeah.
I'm sorry that happened to you, bro. That was scary.
The look in his eyes after he was rescued gives an insight into the boy's life-changing ordeal. 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was abducted at knife point from her bedroom window by deranged rapist Brian David Mitchell. Smart was tortured and abused for 9 months by Mitchell and his partner, Wanda Barzy. The couple subjected Elizabeth to a disturbing and twisted marriage ceremony, during which Mitchell claimed to be her husband. Following this, they traveled across the United States, using Elizabeth to beg for money and preach their bizarre beliefs. To avoid detection protection, they forced her to wear a disguise at all times, including a veil and other unusual clothing. They also subjected her to extreme deprivation, forcing her to eat garbage and keeping her subdued with drugs. After 9 months of horrific abuse and captivity, Elizabeth was rescued by police in Utah.
I definitely think it's been a miracle. I don't know how else it can even be described.
Barzee was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Mitchell received a life sentence. Oxana Malaya's story is one of the most tragic and unique cases of human neglect. While she didn't exactly disappear, her transformation is equally heartbreaking. Born in Ukraine, Oxana was just 3 years old when her alcoholic father abandoned her, effectively ceasing to care for her. Left to fend for herself, Oxana was raised by dogs, and over time, she began to imitate their behavior. By the time authorities found her at age 7, Oxana had lost the ability to speak and lacked many basic skills. She exhibited dog-like behaviors, running on all fours, barking, sleeping on the floor, and holding objects in her mouth. Now, 40 years old, Oxana works on a farm, milking cows. While her dog-like behaviors have largely disappeared, she still faces intellectual impairments as a result of her early years of isolation. In a later interview, Oxana expressed how deeply offensive she finds the label dog girl and revealed that one of her greatest desires is to eventually find her biological mother.
I want to see them with my own eyes so desperately, because I've been told I have no parents, but actually I do have them.
After Julian Hernandez's parents separated in 2002, he was kidnapped by his father and moved from Alabama to Ohio, where he lived for 13 years. The young boy was just 5 years old at the time of his disappearance and didn't see his mother again until he was an 18-year-old high school senior who looked like this. Julian, who had grown up to be a promising student and athlete, had begun the application process for college when he discovered that he was listed as a missing person. His father was arrested and charged with kidnapping and obtaining false documents. During sentencing, Julian begged for his father to be kept out of prison.
The time I spent with him is the only time I've ever truly felt at home and at peace. My family here needs him more than anything else, and I can't imagine going on in my life without his support.
Despite this, Bobby Hernandez received 4 years in prison for his crimes. Shawn Hornbeck was missing for 4.5 years after being kidnapped and sexually abused by Michael Devlin. The boy from Missouri was just 11 years old when he went missing and had changed dramatically by the time he was rescued. The twisted child molester eventually kidnapped another boy, Ben Ownby, in 2007, but was soon caught when his vehicle was spotted by a witness and tracked down by police. Thankfully, Ownby was only kept prisoner for 4 days. Hornbeck, however, was barely recognizable when he was rescued after years of horrific sexual abuse and imprisonment. It is believed that Shawn's maturation during puberty was a key reason Devlin had abducted a second boy. Savannah Todd was just 2.5 months old when she was kidnapped by her mother, Dorothy Lee Barnett. Her parents had just divorced, and her father was awarded custody, so her mother snatched Savannah and disappeared. Savannah was taken by her mother from South Carolina and transported around the world for years, having no idea she had been kidnapped. Avoiding an FBI manhunt, her mother took her to France, Malaysia, Singapore, South Africa, and more, before finally being discovered in Australia 19 years after her abduction. Her mother was arrested and charged with kidnapping and passport fraud. Her mother's arrest and the truth of her family history was a massive shock to Savannah, who had until then lived in Australia as Samantha.
And that's when I learned where I was born. I learned Savannah. I didn't know anything before that.
Savannah's father tragically missed out on his daughter's entire childhood, as Savannah was a grown woman by the time they were reunited. Savannah stayed in Australia, but said she would try to have a relationship with her father after she was discovered. Thanks for watching Crime 101.